I want to move straight into talking about the value proposition with this, because this is a fantastic looking device, and I will talk about that now. The question on everyone's minds is, why spend this amount of money on this device? And it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense to spend this kind of money on a device like this. It is fantastically expensive for what you're getting. We've got the Anbernic RG34XX, the proper GBA clone. This thing is lovely, and this thing is a lot cheaper. So if you just want to play GBA and you're not looking for something like premium and pointless like this, this is definitely the biggest alternative. It has a lovely screen on it, and it's going to give you just wonderful nostalgia going into it. The MIUI A30, I think it's called. Much smaller screen, very, very cheap, cheap as chips. You put Spruce on here. There've been a few little updates to it, and this is a cute little device, and it's going to give you Famicom feelings for days, but it is quite cheap. Like, these controls are like, these shoulder buttons are shockingly bad, and it's a cheap little thing. But this, you know, I was talking to Stubbs from Retro Handhelds, and the thing about a cheap device is you're not afraid to chuck it in your bag, and this is a great little travel companion. That being said, why would you spend this amount of money on this device? And the answer is, this is just something very, very special. And if you have, like, a lot of us have a very deep connection to these games, and it doesn't make sense to everybody that we have these feelings about these games, but it reminds us of times in our lives, and you know, there's joy attached to it, and sometimes you can't really put a price on that. And I think that if you are wanting to spend money on a gift to yourself, or you want to spend money on a gift to someone who has a specific connection to the Game Boy Micro, or has a specific, deep, meaningful connection to the Game Boy Advance, then this kind of money makes sense. It's kind of like, who cares what it costs, because it is giving me the feelings that I want for those specific things. It is just beautifully, beautifully crafted. The buttons are excellent. You've got a fingerprint sensor up here, which just gives, like, it's so nice to have a fingerprint sensor to open it up. You know, it is an Android device, and so your information is a bit more secure on there. Start and select buttons are streamlined into here. Unfortunately, we don't have a display port over here, which I think is a miss on a device like this. The thing that I think could have been with this is a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with display port out, and then you would have, because it's got active cooling over here. And so you've got a little handheld that you could put on your table and play almost everything via the display port out. You could emulate like Switch and all sorts of things. It would have been, that's a missed opportunity, because you know, I think they are like making a huge profit on a device like this, but just eat away a little bit of those profits and do that. I think that would have been ideal. But that being said, you are just getting an absolutely premium device. All metal. There's a metal piece here, metal here. Now, these buttons seem pretty good to me. These action buttons are quite small. If you compare them to any of these, the buttons are, I think, definitely smaller than this GBA. They've got slightly bigger action buttons there. So we've got small action buttons on here, but very nice soft press, so they aren't very clacky. They don't make a lot of noise, and I'm getting a very direct response with these action buttons. And the same with the D-pad, a nice soft retro D-pad. I would hazard to say that this might be one of the nicer sets of controls I've had on a retro device. And then you've got these triggers up at the top here, and they are also soft press. They're not very noisy. And as you can see here with my Street Fighter test, my Shoryukens, my Hadoukens were quite easy to execute. Probably one of the easiest I've tested in a while. These are some of the nicest buttons I've used in quite some time. You know, in terms of a membrane, these dome switch D-pads on the Retroids, just because they're more direct. But this gives you all the retro feels, but also works really well. The big thing with an Android device is the setup, so it took me quite a while to just get going, and I did a pretty simple down and dirty setup. I started by downloading a few Android apps, and I've noticed that these Netflix games are quite cool on Android devices with controllers. So I've downloaded a few to test there, particularly Shredder's Revenge. I like using the Netflix version. Sonic Mania is quite nice. There's a couple, obviously Dead Cells. I got my Obtainium. Now, Obtainium is great for managing any app that comes from a GitHub page. So I've got RetroArch set up here, And that's kind of all I need right now. I will see if I do any higher end testing, and I'm going to show you a little bit of like games that I've tested now just via the RetroArch. And that's kind of the limitation of this. I might try a bit of 3DS, but with the screen, Nintendo DS maybe, like with a button to switch. I might try that, but that's not my focus here with this device, and we'll get into that in terms of the value proposition and all that. So Obtainium, I got my RetroArch, I've set up RetroArch. You can check out my guide on setting up Android for that. Then the next thing that I did was I went to the Emulation Station Patreon. I've paid their fee and I have downloaded the latest version of ESDE. What I did was I pressed and held to add that to the home page. So now on the home page, I'm not going to make this my home screen per se, because there's a few little things like I want to get to my settings, and I do like having access to like my Android apps, and I don't like managing my Android apps through ESDE. So you can set that as your home screen and just have it open as a console. That is quite a nice way to use it, but then I just find I end up pressing the home button and trying to get into the Android app often. Okay. And then what I did was I went for the MINUI style theme. It's called Analog OS Menu. When I scraped, all I did was I made sure that I was scraping, let's check content settings. I just did game names and I did the marquee. When I open a game, so it's neatened, so I've got the text, the names of the games have been neatened up. And then when I open a game, I get that little logo over there. And that's it. It's a nice simple setup that I've gone for here. On my RetroArch, I've set up some shortcuts and all that for hotkeys and all that. So you can have a look on my setup guide on how to do that if you are interested in that. I had to, when it first arrived, the fan wasn't working, and I know that there are some people who've noticed this. I had to go in here, handheld settings, and then here by updates, there were a whole lot of updates to be done. Updated it, restarted it, and the fan worked. The thing about the fan is that I'm not noticing a difference between low and high, but then when you put it on max, and that's at its max, it's not super loud. So a very nice fan, a very nice sounding fan, it's got a lower drone to it, so it doesn't have that high-pitched whiny sound. So you've got active cooling, so you can push the crap out of this thing. And that's something that's probably going to irritate a lot of people, is that you can't get audio via a dongle through the USB. And there's also a weird thing with the USB where you need to go, and I'll quickly show that now. You need to go into settings and then connected devices and switch USB mode on. USB mode will turn the controls off, but then allow you to do file transfer. Very strange thing with USB mode. And it's within the connected devices, so like where you would set up your Bluetooth. So I have paired my Bluetooth headphones. You'll see them here, and they are working very nicely with this. And so I can use this as Bluetooth. And it like kind of brought the thought to me, this is kind of like an iPod video that also has gaming controls and can play a bunch of games. And when you think about it that way, it is really cool. It's quite a heavy device. It's really cool. And on that note, I showed it to my daughter and I was like, don't you think this is a really cool handheld? Don't you think this is a cool one that's come through Daddy's studio? And she just said no. She said it looks old-fashioned and it looks boring. So whatever. Anyway, so we've got Bluetooth headphones and that is nice. And moving on to the general controls of the thing, it has your start and select here on the edge of the device. Now, while it looks nice, and they are nice little function buttons, this is the IR space button and this is the home button, the Android home button. So you press there and you go home. But in using it, you end up putting your finger on the fingerprint sensor and you move your hand around and you end up pressing these buttons because they are quite delicate, like they're easy to press. So these buttons needed to be a bit harder to press, especially if you are going to put them on the edge like this. But that's something you will get used to if you use the device regularly. But if it is something that kind of sits on the shelf and you use from time to time, that is kind of going to bug you, these buttons. If you press the IR space button, there's a multitask thing over here. So instead of having to do that to use the Android multitasking, you just press the IR space button and then your latest apps will pop up at the bottom there. So that's a cool little detail. And that's the thing I like about AYAneo is I know they are expensive, but there is an attention to detail here. The unboxing experience is really special. I have said this before with my AYAneo 2S is these devices are great gifts. Like they're expensive gifts, but they are really special gifts because of the unboxing experience and just because of the attention to detail that they put into their devices. But as I mentioned, there are cheaper devices out there that can give you a lot of the feels and the experience that this is giving you. You know, you can get, I modded my Retroid Pocket Mini to look like this. Like, look at this. Look how uncanny that is. I put these maroon buttons and I thought it would look good on the black. Someone said it didn't, but I think it looks fantastic. AYAneo went for it, so I must be onto something. And so I tried to do what this is doing with this. And here's the thing, this is why I say this is what could have been with the AYAneo Pocket Micro Classic, is the fact that, and it irks me, it is irksome when people in the comments go, it could have been more powerful, it could have had a better screen. That's like always, every single, like with the Switch 2 release, could have been more powerful, could have had a better screen. And I know that I'm being one of the idiots, but it is kind of the reality with this handheld because of the price. Like for this price, they could have put an OLED screen in here. They could have put a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 or maybe that new like microprocessor that's Qualcomm are working on. They could have put that in here and then put a display port out on the USB-C, and we would have had an absolute beast to do pretty much everything with that goes into our pockets.